Welcome to Safety Connection, leveling up your workplace inspection game. I am Tova Larson. I'm your host for the session today. If you are just hopping on, feel free to drop your location in our beautiful province in the chat. I'm always curious where we have folks joining from today. And today we have a very large number of people joining from Western Ontario, Northwestern Ontario, Thunder Bay representing. We also have Cassandra and Kenora, some folks in Ottawa. Good morning to Jessica. So feel free to drop that in the chat, and I'll cover some more of those when we get into another portion of the intro. We're going to do some quick housekeeping, how to use an MS Teams room to get started. Just a couple of highlights. One, headphones are usually recommended for the best audio quality. The audio comes through your computer. We recommend that you mute or at the very least flip over all your other distracting devices. And we will be using the chat extensively to ask me questions and to share our own experiences, successes, and ideas. Your microphone will be muted and your camera will remain off. That's kind of a safety connection thing. We also have a whopping 48 people registered for this session, and that's a lot of cameras. So no cameras today. The conversation chat, you click the speech bubble, it pops up a box on the right-hand side. There's a box that says type a message. You type a message, hit enter, everybody can see it. To make the content full screen, you can go to the three dots, you hit full screen. To get out of that, you just hit escape. Fortunately, you're not in a camera right now, so you don't have to worry about, whether you get up and realize you're not wearing any pants. I always tell people, if you make the things full screen and you're on camera, you can't see you, but other people can see you. All right, so polls. We don't have any polls in this session, I don't think, but they generally pop up in the chat. Sometimes they pop up like right in front of your screen. You just select something, hit submit, and you're good to go. And please don't take screenshots of this. Our images are licensed to Getty, and as a result, we need to ensure that they don't get reproduced because our license doesn't cover that. Safety connection. What is a safety connection? So a safety connection is a fantastic, I like to say it's the best unsung hero of WSPS. If this is your first safety connection, I have amazing news for you. We have lots of them, and they are amazing. So what is the goal? It's for you to stay in touch with industry topics. They are, of course, prepaid, no-cost services by the fabulous folks at WSPS. They're not training sessions, but they are an opportunity to share some best practices, to really hit some great, get some great information, and for you to attend, obviously, in your own personal workspace, which is great because we have folks joining from all over the province. I like to say it's about learning, sharing, and discovering what's of value to you. And what does that mean to me? I am going to be dropping tips and hints that you think, wow, that's not really going to work for our workplace. And then I'm going to hit another one. You're like, oh my God, that's the best idea since sliced bread. It is about picking out the nuggets of gold that you think are going to work best for you. When we develop a safety connection, we're hitting at a very wide audience. So you might be working in an office. Another person here might be working in a factory. We might have someone who's working, in a healthcare facility. We have lots of folks joining from the province. So what's going to work for you might not work for somebody else. And it's really about figuring out what's going to be, what those best ideas are that you're going to apply best in your workplace. Let's move forward, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. Hi, I'm Tova. I work for Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. I am a health and safety consultant, and I am based out of Eastern Ontario in beautiful Ottawa. I've been in the health and safety field for 19 years. In that time, I've trained more than 10,000 certified members. I've joined health and safety committees. If you had me for certification, welcome back. I have also worked in the federally regulated sector, the provincially regulated sector. I've worked in the private sector. I've worked in the public sector. I've run the gamut. I've seen the good, bad, and the ugly of workplace inspections. And this session really came about because I have a nearly infinite number of tips on how to improve your inspections, and is probably one of the, like, everyone's doing them, or you're supposed to be doing them, but often they're just filling out a checklist. And we can do better than that. So that's what this session is going to be about. One fun fact about me when I'm not working is I am a ski patroller. So if you go to Camp Fortune, which is just on the Quebec side from Ottawa, and you get hurt, you might see me. let's move forward to talk a little bit more about what our agenda is going to cover. But before we do, I want to know from you, what are your greatest workplace inspection challenges? And as you're dropping into the chat, I'm going to give some greetings to some folks in the chat as well. We have Jessica's in Ottawa, Christine's in St. Mary's, Ontario, Brenda's in Bolton. We have Rikshana, who's joining from Ottawa as well. Marie is in beautiful Shelburne, Ontario. We have Recky joining from Newmarket. Jamie's in Red Lake. We have Janice in Pickering, Ben in Vaughan. We have Dana joining us from Toronto Metropolitan University. Denise is joining from St. Catharines. Jonathan Hamilton. Christine is in Leamington. We have someone joining from Perth, Ontario, just set outside of Ottawa. And we're getting into some of the challenges. Andrew is in North Carolina via Guelph. Okay, cool. We've had folks in our sessions, by the way, as far away on almost every continent. I've had folks from Europe. I've had folks from South America. I've had lots of folks from the US. I've even had some folks joining us from Nigeria. So it's you never know who's going to show up here in the virtual world of Safety Connection. Some of the challenges that I am seeing, though, and they are great challenges to discuss. Lee, your challenge seems to be the size of your property, and you are not alone. Greg, making sure they're actually regularly completed. So that due diligence piece, making sure they're done, they're documented, getting supervisors on board with time off for inspections. Oh, wow. Yeah, we can talk about that. Completing corrective actions, staff support on follow-ups. Also that the repeat offenses. Yeah, I like to call those the whack-a-mole. You may be like, made a recommendation, maybe you even addressed it the first time, and then it whack-a-mole like pops up looking slightly different, but still very similar. Amanda is joining us from London. We also have Winter mentioning management buy-in. Yeah, lack of results from hazards identified on inspections. Huge challenge. Getting the inspections done in a timely fashion, and we can talk about some tips for that. JHSC comfort with the areas and equipment being inspected. For context, our JHSC is just restarting their activities after a break due to a lack of safety management oversight. Fair. I like to say every workplace is on a safety journey at all times. And you can move along on that like continuum of safety. You can go forward. You can, take that breather like you did and then move forward again. And there's no shame in that. We're all working to move forward. Sometimes you take a couple steps back. I am the first safety professional in the organization. Congratulations, Jessica. By the way, for those of you that this is true for everybody, not just for Jessica, if you feel like connecting with me, I'm also on LinkedIn. My name is Tova Larson. You can see it like probably right there. Feel free to hit me up. And don't hesitate to reach out to WSPS. We have lots of great ideas for you. Psychological hazards. Ooh, I feel like we could do an entire safety connection just on that. But yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that. Everything is always acceptable. Oh my gosh, I love it. Nick, amazing. Do my workers think I believe that everything is perfect? There's acceptable and there's good, and there's also filling out the checklist and then finding the hazards. Finding time to schedule, following up and monitoring. What's worker related versus what is member related as a legal situation is different. Here's what's interesting. We talk about roles and responsibilities, internal responsibility system. When we talk joint health and safety committees, and I want to be very clear, when I talk inspections, while we are talking about joint health and safety committee workplace inspections, health and safety reps in smaller workplaces are also doing them. Supervisors are doing them. Health and safety professionals in workplaces often do them as well on behalf of management. So it's not just a one-shot deal where you're like, it's JHSC or nothing. No, lots of different workplace inspections are done. And in terms of what you're responsible for as a JHSC, you're responsible in the inspection for identifying hazards, along with checking to see if your existing controls are working. We'll talk a little bit more about what that can look like. When it comes to worker behaviors and supervisor behaviors, like not enforcing safety rules, which is something supervisors have to do, we really want to look to ensure that organizations are being set up for success. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. All right. So what are we actually looking for here? The foundation of health and safety inspections is both safety hazards, which we're generally really good at finding, and health hazards, which we're generally really bad at finding. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about both. Health hazards have the potential to cause occupational diseases or injury or illnesses. Safety hazards usually have the potential to cause traumatic injury. Now we're going to be digging into, and this kind of looks like our agenda for the day. We're going to be digging into 5 steps of great workplace inspections. Preparing for your inspections, we're going to talk about building great tools, building a great plan, actually conducting them, developing recommendations, reporting, and then we'll talk a little bit about following up. And it sounds like following up is actually a topic that this group really wants to learn more about. Some of those additional challenges that I'm seeing drop into the chat. Storage gas and propane inside of the building. Oh my goodness, that is an immediately dangerous situation. We definitely don't want to do that. One of the things that comes back to training, supervisory oversight. When we talk training of workers, we're not talking just about training them where to put it, but also training them on their roles and responsibilities as a worker under the OHSA. And that includes following any safe work practices or procedures, including where to actually store your compressed gases. Inspecting things that I have no idea how they work. Fair. D. So many issues with that. I have some suggestions on how to improve that. Up to and including the, it was that show, the one that I'm picturing, but I can't actually remember the name of, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Phoning a friend. Getting a friend, that is a good start. Having the whole building completed rather than just a sweep. Absolutely. Vast difference in skills with those completing inspections. We'll talk about skill building. Production taking precedent. Ooh, that's a dangerous precedent, but yeah, absolutely a big challenge. Follow-ups, inspecting machinery. Again, the unfamiliar. Again, very fair. Sheer size of the inspection area. Following up. People keep blocking fire extinguishers. Face palm. Greg, follow-up question. Do you have like the tape on the floor, like the black and yellow that's like, don't put anything here? If you don't, that might be a great recommendation for something, rather than just telling people not to put things in front of the fire extinguisher or putting a sign that says do not block, actually putting the area on the floor. I typically go with a 3-foot square that actually tells them you can't block this. And if you are dealing with something that involves a bit of a corridor, create the corridor. All right. Lots of people are storing. Oh, maybe that was from before. Workers sometimes not themselves make in terms of accountabilities. Hazards working with the public. Oh, Nadine. Yes, absolutely. Small office administrative teams spread over a large office building. Yep, definitely. That's work hard to determine issues when there are only small changes. Yeah, so it's like the like somebody moved a pen over here version of health and safety. That is actually also really challenging. So we want to take as much of a holistic approach as possible. No accountability for those who do not respect H&S policies and procedures. That is often a supervisory oversight issue, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And by the way, I have the black EOC, people ignore it. Training. I hate leaning in training, but I also ask the question of what are they putting in these spaces? If they're putting chairs in those spaces, do you have another spot for the chairs to go that's actually like the chair spot? If you don't, and you're not creating deliberately selected spaces for things to go, well, it's no excuse to block a fire extinguisher. You can kind of see how we would get there. All right, so let's move forward to talk a little, and I will be hitting on some of these. And by the way, if I do not, for whatever reason, hit on your particular question in the chat, which I try to answer all of them, I am always happy to talk workplace inspections with you in a one-on-one call. You can always email me, either email a question or you can email, and I'm happy to discuss your particular problems with you at no cost. Noticing housekeeping issues versus H&S. Jenny, I have good news for you. Every housekeeping item you see is a health and safety issue. So it just doesn't have to be the one or the other. They are one and the same. Let's first talk about planning and preparing now. So a great plan is what allows you to be able to build a great inspection. In terms of both Ontario workplaces and federal workplaces, you have to inspect part of the workplace each month. Now, if it is practical to do the entire workplace every single month, you must do so. But like I went to Carleton University, they have 50 some odd buildings now. That's a lot. That's not practical to do the entire thing every single month. So they do a portion of it every single month, and it still leads them to having to do something ridiculous like almost 5 buildings a month just to be able to get them all done. And they are very widely inside. But you have to inspect something every single month so the entire workplace gets inspected at a minimum of once a year. Does that mean that you have to only do them quarterly because you have meetings quarterly? Some joint health and safety committees meet monthly. That's awesome. If you meet quarterly, you still have to do your inspections every month, even if you only meet quarterly. And of course, the same is true for federal workplaces where they meet 9 times a year, but you still have to do 12 inspections. When we think about leveling up, though, it's always better if we can inspect the entire workplace every single month. Again, little asterisks with the practicality part of this. And it's always better if you consistently meet monthly, but your meetings, and feel free to hit us up and listen in for, we have, oh my gosh, it's like on the tip of my tongue. Harnessing your JHSC's greatness. If you're stuck in inspect, meet, repeat at your meetings, I have good news for you. We have a safety connection that can help with that too. So let's talk about developing some amazing tools. So the first step in developing your tools is to select your zones. And we'll talk a little bit more about zones in a few minutes, some of those underappreciated zones, those spaces that don't seem to make it onto anyone's inspection. Once we look at those zones, then we start asking about the tasks and activities that are performed in those zones. So if I'm going into let's say I'm in, and I'm going to use the example of a retirement home for this example because I've worked in a retirement home. A retirement home is going to have kitchen facilities. A retirement home is going to probably have some nursing stations. They're going to have recreation rooms. They're going to have housekeeping at a minimum. And the hazards and tasks and activities that go on in a commercial kitchen facility are going to be very different that go on in housekeeping. And the types of hazards are going to be very different at the nursing station. So we want to be sure that we're considering the various tasks and activities of the zones themselves. Then we start gathering more intelligence on our zones and the activities themselves by getting some lists of the equipment and materials in the various zones. If I'm in the kitchen, I likely have a dishwasher, maybe a food processor, a stick blender. I'm going to have a walk-in fridge. I'm going to have a grill top. I may have a deep fryer, depending on the extent of the kitchen facilities. Whereas if I'm in the housekeeping side of things, I may have, ironing devices. I'm going to have washers. I'm going to have dryers. I'm going to have a variety of different pieces of equipment. We're also going to have different materials. We're going to probably have cleaning agents in both, but we're going to have different cleaning agents in each of those various zones that I mentioned. When we think about the nurses station, they're likely to have more on the biocide side of things, whereas if you talk to the folks in the laundry, they likely have a lot of stain-related things. We also want to think about environmental factors. This is where we think about both indoor and outdoor temperatures. Weather, we do live in Ontario. Weather has 12 months of the year to it and four seasons. But if you really ask somebody in Ottawa, they're like 15 seasons and they change based on, right now I wouldn't say that it's summer, but I think come around 5 o'clock, I'm going to decide that it's summer. Right now it's spring, and then we have early summer, we've got late winter, we have Smarch, which is like third winter. And so we think about environmental factors. We also want to think about flooring surfaces. We want to get more information about lighting in the area, just in short, what to expect in the area in terms of environmental conditions. And then we get into our processes and procedures. What tasks are we doing? And then what processes and procedures do you have in place? If you are working in a laundry facility, you're going to have processes for handling your large amounts of laundry. You are likely going to have a process for ironing. We want to look at the procedure that you're using and gather as much information about these zones as possible. And from there, you may also want to include, if you have them, any hazard assessments or hazard identification and risk assessment documents. Some people call it a risk register. We have a safety connection called hazards and risks and introductions. If you want to know more about how to do a hazard assessment, that session, again, safety connection, prepaid no cost sessions, you are able to join us for that as well. And with all of this information, then you start creating your checklist. One of my biggest pet peeves with workplace inspections overall is lots of workplaces will simply go and say, oh, that's cool. We've got a, we downloaded a checklist off the internet. And like, not just like internet checklists, they can give you some really good ideas of things to include. We have some great checklists on our own website, but do I think you should just download it and like use it verbatim when there are lots of things on it that may not actually apply to your workplace? I think you should take them as an idea and then create something when we think about leveling up that's going to be more specific to your own hazards. And then don't forget to regularly evaluate the effectiveness of your tools, get some user feedback from the people doing your inspections, and make changes as necessary. These are living documents. If something new comes into your workplace, you want to update your checklist. If you, remove a particular piece of equipment or process, maybe you need to take that off your checklist. Maybe they find, the checklist is too long or the checklist doesn't have enough detail. When I talk about checklist filling out exercise versus hazard identification exercise, I think you need a little bit of both. The checklists are there to help prompt you and to remind you of some of the things to look for, but even a well-developed checklist or tool is not the be-all and end-all. If you spot something that's not on your checklist, you still have to note it. So we're going to first start talking about land plans and workplace inspections. We want to start by breaking our area into zones, and I usually start with a combination of a land plan and a floor plan. So the floor plan covers your indoor areas, but why do I think you need a land plan? You need a land plan because outdoor areas count too. And we want to think about our schedule and the size of the zones. If you're in a workplace that's kind of too big to do the entire thing every single month, but not big enough to break it into 12 because you're like looking at an area that's too small to really make sense, break it into a number that divides evenly into 12. Break it into 2, break it into 3, break it into 4, break it into 6. It allows you to be able to put them on a cycle and to be able to complete an equal number over the course of a calendar year. We also want to plan our route, and I would suggest that you alternate the direction of your route each time, so you're not like facing the same way and missing hazards in the process. Now, if your facility is really, 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 really huge, you could break it into a number that is itself divisible by 12. If you had 36 zones, which sounds like a massive number, and then you had 3 shifts a day, have each one of the shifts do a different zone. And that way you get 3 zones done each month by 3 different people on 3 different shifts. And you're still going to get the entire workplace done in the course of the calendar year. Some of those frequently overlooked areas. So what are the places that everybody seems to forget? Bathrooms, locker rooms, management inner offices. Just because you have a fancy door does not mean that your office is not inspected. Parking lots, yards, back areas, a lot of the grounds people forget about. We also often forget about sheds and outbuildings. It could be a guardhouse. It could be some sort of a pump house. Those areas need to be inspected too. If you've got a big tank farm, the whole tank farm needs to be inspected. So we probably want to sort of, possibly even do a bit of a sweep. Absolutely. Definitely. Nadine, great point. And I mentioned it, I think, in the form of cleaning closets, but maintenance rooms, areas that are closed off to other staff, you still need to include those 100%. We also want to think about any amenity spaces, things like on-site gyms that are provided by the employer, or perhaps you have a meditation room, a prayer room, a lactation room. Those spaces need to be included as well. Roofs. Take a deep breath. If you've got like the heart palpitations, please don't go on your roof. That sounds like a bad idea. That does not mean that you need to inspect the roof, but you need to make sure it gets inspected by someone, whether it is your landlord, whether you get someone to do it with a drone. I absolutely think you need to look at your roof at least once a year, preferably before winter sets in and you discover you have a leaking roof. Always easier to fix a roof during the summer or spring, summer, fall than it is to do it when there's already snow on it. We also want to think about any roadways that might be on property. I think about Carleton University as a good example, and they have like a good few kilometers of roadway on property. And those roads are private roads and they are owned by the university. Cannot forget about the roads. Same thing with sidewalks, any on-site staff accommodations. When I think about work camps, obviously, we need to be mindful that these are being used as dwelling spaces at the time, but they are dwelling spaces that are being provided by the employer. I would typically recommend doing your inspections of these, depending on your employment agreement and the agreement you have in terms of accommodations. Some accommodations have an agreement that says, we can inspect at any time. I typically, for the purposes of privacy, would recommend that you inspect kind of but if you're like kind of fly in, fly out, which is pretty common in the mining industry, that you inspect as people are coming in or going out so that you're not invading someone's kind of personal space. And we also want to think about spaces that may not actually belong to us, but we use as part of our leasing arrangement. Specifically, the path of travel in a shared office building from the parking lot to the suite. Include the lobby, include the hallway up to your office, because all of your clients and all of your staff are having to go into these spaces to get to where they work. And if they pull into the parking lot and they end up, slipping and falling on that smooth granite floor in the lobby of your building, there is a reasonable chance that that injury could be compensable by WSIB. And therefore, this is a path of travel that involves a work-related task. As you work in your retirement home, what is the rule for inspecting resident suites? That's a good question. I should also preface, I worked in a retirement home starting when I was 11 years old. I worked as a prep cook in the kitchen, and I didn't actually know that working in a commercial kitchen was illegal as an actual child until I was a grown-up. So I didn't actually do much of the work in the suites, but I absolutely can get back to you on that question because I have not had that question before. And I'm writing it down. I am going to ask Christy that you pop me an email, so I have your email, but I am going to research that question for you. Also, as a very quick aside, nobody told me about child labor laws as an actual child. I absolutely recommend that if somebody looks like a child, that you ask them how old they are. Please don't hire illegal child laborers. All right, so what about people who work at home? I think you missed out on our hybrid work in the OHSA. So currently, TBD on changes. And if you're listening to this in the future, in the recording, this may have changed by the time you listen to this. Currently, today, which is May 15th of 2024. Section 3, subsection 1 of the OHSA exempts work that is being done by the owner or occupant of their dwelling in their dwelling. So what that means is that if you are working from home, the OHSA is not covering you. However, A week ago, the Ontario government announced in the Working for Workers 5 Act that they were looking to amend Section 3 of the OHSA to include telework related arrangements. So I am going to tell you that in this 5 minutes, hybrid work in the OHSA, you don't have to inspect these workplaces. I can give you the best practice recommendation that you use a template and they inspect their own workplaces. We have a template for that. Feel free to hit me up if you want it. Company cars, you absolutely still need to inspect these. They are considered workplaces. But TBD on Greg on the question about homes, because as telework arrangements are about to potentially be added to the OHSA, more specifically, we don't 100% know what that's going to look like. So I want to be very clear about that. Yes, and by the way, Nadine, the difference between WSIB and OHSA, home workplaces are currently, today, not covered by the OHSA, but they are in fact still covered by the WSIA, the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, which means that WSIB will in fact approve claims for at-home work-related causes. They are two separate acts and they're two separate entities. You've got the ministry, you've got WSIB, and those two laws do not always match up. What if workers are running checklists on their vehicles daily? Should it still be a part of our inspection? I think I would still maybe audit the checklists to verify that they're being done and see that any deficiencies are in fact being caught. And I still would inspect that vehicle at least once a year. Yes with a but. It's kind of the difference between a JHSC inspection versus a daily pre-op check. And I don't think a daily pre-op check replaces a JHSC inspection. So once you've got your zones, then we start gathering more intelligence on each of our zones. And we do that by figuring out what we need for the people doing the inspection to be safe. Do they need safety boots? Do they need special pedestrian safety training? Do they need emergency preparedness training? I've been some places where they've got poison gas systems and bottles on the wall. And if you hear the scary alarm, you grab a bottle and you run. If that's the case, the people doing the workplace inspection, even though they might work in an office without the poison gas, they need to know what to do and what that alarm sounds like. We also want to ensure that we get a sense of what our equipment inventory is in each of those areas, and not just big equipment. I would also include hand tools. And part of this is to get a sense of what types of equipment you in fact do have and what the hazards are of that equipment. It also allows your inspection team to randomly select a piece or two of equipment that's on that list and ask for the manufacturer's instructions and specifications, which you're supposed to keep. They can also pull maintenance records on that equipment to see that it's being maintained properly, as well as any circle check documentation related to the equipment. Once we know what our equipment is, this is also a great opportunity to try to figure out, and maybe outside the inspection time, for those of you that are working in areas that are not always familiar to you, to team up with one of your experienced operators and have them show you how the equipment works at a time that's convenient for them and you, which is not always during the inspection. So it allows you to be able to build your own skills and knowledge about your workplace by figuring out what your equipment is. And you can say, hey, I've never seen someone use a stamping press before. I should really go and talk to the manager, try to get a demo of the stamping press so I know what it's all about. That's a really smart way to learn more. When we think about tasks and activities, process flows, stuff goes in, stuff goes out, stuff happens in the middle. That's a process flow. If we can see raw materials come in, widget goes out, that's an opportunity to be able to spot any particular high risk processes, but also to have a sense of what's actually done in this particular zone. Along with that, you may want to select some written work instructions to draw from. One of my favorites to look at is placards for lockout and tagout. Why? Because placards for lockout and tagout are legally required under Section 42 of the Industrial Establishment Regulation. They're legally required to be in writing. There are lots of other work instructions that don't necessarily have to be in writing. This is one that does. So if you're missing placards or you're missing written lockout instructions, that's a big gap. We want to take a look at any safe work procedures in the area and understand more about the schedules and activity that are going on in those areas so we can plan the timing of our inspections. We also want to take a look at any documents pertinent to the area, such as first aid reports, engineers' reports, or pre-start health and safety reviews. Those are conducted by a licensed professional engineer in the province of Ontario for certain circumstances in factories. You can see Section 7 of the Industrial Establishment Regulation to learn more about PSRs. Also, take a look and see if there's been a visit by the ministry and whether they issued orders and any previous inspection reports as well. That allows you to be able to spot repeat items. And especially on the orders front, if you notice there are orders and they haven't been complied with, giant red flags, that's not good. You can also look back at historical orders. I like to keep my orders for at least 5 years so I can go back and see what the orders were and whether not only did we address them, but are they staying fixed? For chemical agents and physical agents, get a sense of what the chemicals and physical agents are in the area, whether it's noise, vibration, radiation, hot temperatures, and the totality of our solids, liquids, and gases that we can have as chemicals. I always like to recommend having a comprehensive, up-to-date chemical inventory, including locations that may differ from your storage location. You might use it in one place, store it in another, and I think you should have an inventory that includes both. If you've got safety data sheets, where are they kept? Are they in fact being up to date? There are some new changes. And again, today's date is May 15th, 2024. There are some changes that have come about to the hazardous products regulation that will have an impact on safety data sheets and labeling. There have been some changes to the product classifications. And so there are some new obligations for that. Are electronic SDS accessible? Yes, they absolutely are, provided that your staff have access to them at all times via computer. They know how to use that computer, and they've been shown directly how to access those safety data sheets. Along the thoughts of chemicals, you may have also had monitoring done, and I would grab the last report of either noise monitoring, maybe you've done some vibration testing, or you've had some sort of chemical exposure testing done. See when the last time it was done. We typically recommend updating it every 2 or 3 years, or more often if you've made changes to your controls, such as increasing or improving your ventilation system, to see if that ventilation system is in fact making a difference. What if the orders are not staying fixed after being complied with? That's a great question. And this is true for all types of hazards that seem to play the whack-a-mole game. It means you have not identified and addressed the root cause contributing factors, plural, that have led to them. And we'll talk a little bit more about contributing factors in a little bit. What safety sheets required to have? Can you, Christy, feel free to elaborate on your question, and I'll come to it in just a second. Like, what safety data sheets are we required to have? You're required to have safety data sheets for every product that you have on site. Glue, nail polish remover, dish soap. I would recommend having one even for, and the ones that you're listing right now are consumer labeled products, right? Like, you're not generally buying nail polish remover in a big jug with a Winnis label. I would still get a safety data sheet for that product. Someone had to make it, someone had to pack it. There is a safety data sheet available. The reason that I would get a safety data sheet for your consumer labeled products is consumer labels have next to no hazard information on them. So when we look at what's considered hazardous chemicals, there are products that are regulated under the Hazardous Products Act. Those ones you are legally required to get a safety data sheet for, but it's very difficult to demonstrate that you know the hazards and risks of a consumer product without the safety data sheet on site. Moving on to internal responsibility, I would also take a look at your org chart, any job descriptions to get a sense of what the tasks and activities are of the people in these areas, your policies and programs that relate to those areas, and the roles and responsibilities contained in them, and any training records related to the job descriptions and the individuals at the workplace. One of the things I look for on training records is when was the last time someone was trained. If you train someone, never assume that they're going to remember that training forever. If I train someone on workplace violence and harassment and I trained them 10 years ago, the legislation has even changed. So we want to make sure that we're refreshing our training on a reasonable time basis. Some of it is legislated, some of it is organizational decision making on how long is too long. But we've got these opportunities for us to be able to be sure that people have the most up-to-date information and that they're still fresh on that information. In terms of risk assessments, I mentioned it earlier that risk assessments are one of the ways that we can identify some of the things to look for on our inspections. Whether you're doing JHI, is those job level or field assessments, pre-job, pre-trip, hazard identification risk assessment, could be a risk register, exposure monitoring, even those engineers report or pre-start health and safety reviews. I would also recommend that you ask to see a copy, especially if you're in the GHSC, of your workplace violence risk assessment, and it should be site specific, not just every store in, we know, and I'm going to pick on Starbucks here, but we know that there are a lot of different Starbucks stores and they vary widely in terms of location. Maybe they're in a mall, maybe they're in a high crime neighborhood. The reality is the risks of each store are going to differ a little bit. So we need to make sure that you have a risk assessment that is specific to each one. And then any task related ergonomic reports. I would not include individual office ergonomic assessments in this because those are really tied to a person. I would be more focused on task assessments. And we use this to develop better checklists. I also really bristle when I see a checklist that just says good, bad, okay, or like needs improvement. What I want to see as best possible is a continuum. I like to usually rate things 0 to 5. 0 being like, we do not have this and it is bad. 5 being, this is as good as it's going to get. So that you have a level of continuum. Nothing is perfect. If you get a report that comes across and it's all 5s, I would ask some hard questions about what they were really looking at because things do degrade over time. We want to create a customized checklist for each zone. You could also create mini checklists as part of these checklists for critical parts, such as machine safeguarding or fluid levels, as part of your checklist. So you may not want to do them all every single time, but if you're doing a whole workplace every single month, you might want to pick some of these mini checklists for individual pieces of equipment to look at, or pick a selection of a few pieces of equipment to do a deeper dive. Check the maintenance records, check the training records, check the manufacturer's specs, check those critical parts mini checklist to give you a snapshot, not of every single thing, but to give you a representative sample. We want to include as well the date, start, and end time for the inspection because we know that hazards can be transient and they can pop up even 20 minutes after the inspection is over. And we want to create space for the names of the workers interviewed. However, if someone asks for anonymity, I would give them that anonymity. You could also, instead of putting names, just put the positions of the workers, depending on if you've only got one person in that position, that doesn't give them a lot of anonymity. So really be mindful about what you think is going to be best for your workplace to be able to elicit maximum cooperation with your staff. If they don't mind their names being used, great. And if they do, you want to give them that space. Ensure that all 6 hazard categories are reflected. And we'll talk a little bit about hazard categories in a few minutes. There are 6 of them. There's physical agents, there's chemicals, biological, MSD hazards, psychosocial, and or traditional safety hazards. And I always like to include not only a 0 to 5 and like how, you can also do it as a risk rating. If you're looking at the condition of something, I'd like to say 0 to 5. If we're looking at risk level, I like to go with high, medium, low. Why do I want a risk level? Because you might find 50 hazards on your inspection and only 3 of them are high hazards. And so we want to prioritize those for first action and first follow-up. Now, if you're also finding 50 hazards, and I had this question yesterday during certification, I think, oh my God, I've had so many hazards, I don't even know what to do. Am I taking pictures of all of them? And then I have to create a PowerPoint deck, and then we spend an hour looking at the PowerPoint deck. Stop. Group your hazards into types. If you find 12 hazards that are all slip, trip, fall related, I would take photos of each. But then if it's all in one area, I would dig deeper for why all of these various hazards are there when I make my recommendations. And so I would be looking at treating that as 12 separate issues, but under one hazard. But I still want to be clear about where all 12 of those instances were. All right, so we do the whole workplace every single month, Tova. What more can we do to level up? We can do themed inspections. Super fun. Where you do the whole workplace, but you look at different stuff every month. We can look at MSDs, focus on MSD hazards one month, and focus on fire the next, and slip, trip, fall the next, and then machine safety the next. You could have, depending on your workplace, themes on violence or material handling or electrical. You could look at biohazards, especially when you start talking about like healthcare, residential facilities. You could be thinking about mental health and psychosocial hazards and stress and workload. You could have, if you're a warehouse, I think you should look at your racks every single month. If you have racking, though, you may want to do a deep dive on racking. We'll talk a little bit about the importance of training in a few minutes. You could look at program compliance and really focus on your policies and programs as an inspection item one month, or noise, or pedestrian safety, or a home office. You're not going to anybody's home office, but maybe you send them all a checklist and they send it all back. That's an option. Themes can keep things fresh if you're doing the whole thing every single month. Timing is everything. So when we look at the timing, we want to consider when activities are actually being done. If you're 24/7, 24/5, I would challenge you to have at least one inspection over the calendar year on a weekend, on an evening, on an overnight. We could also create an inspection relay where I do an inspection of zone 1, and then the evening shift does the same inspection, and night shift does the same inspection, and then we collate all of our results. That can be really interesting because different workplaces are different. They have different tasks and activities, and often they have different risks, and they look different at night than they do during the day. Right? Yeah, inspection relays can be really fun, and it can really bring an additional level of challenge. It's also a great way to get, sometimes it's challenging to get night shift joint health and safety committee members to still feel involved like they're part of your team. They still should be coming to your meetings. I tend to schedule my meetings on shift change times. So they're either coming in an hour early, staying an hour late, so they're able to be there at the meeting, but it allows them to be able to really feel like they're contributing. We also want to consider seasonality. We know that noxious weed season is like upon us. When we're talking about heat stress, we want to have those conversations in the summer. Cold stress, you have those conversations in the winter, unless you're, I guess, in a refrigerated warehouse when you're having those all the time. Ice is probably a problem at your loading bay in the winter time. We want to look at parking lot potholes in the spring because that's pothole season. Think about the seasonality of your work so that you're really picking those zones strategically so that you're maximizing the value you get out of doing the inspection. If you have a garden center and you're a grocery store, be sure to inspect your garden center. Well, the garden center is still in operation, which is probably about now. When we plan our year, I recommend that you plan a workplace health and safety committee or joint health and safety committee Outlook calendar where you put every single inspection, including the date and time of every meeting, and then schedule your inspections. One of the fastest ways to overcome your supervisors saying, oh, I don't have time for this, or I don't have time to take that worker off the floor, is you say, okay, well, Joe has an inspection from 1 to 3 on Saturday, November 14th, and you're telling them that in May. And they can see it on the calendar, and it's in Joe's calendar, and it's in the JHSC calendar. If you can't get somebody to fill in that space with 6 months notice, I don't know what to tell you. The more planning you give, I would not, we'll talk about the pros and cons of announced inspections versus surprise inspections, but for making the workers available, the more advance notice you can give, the less plausible deniability the supervisors have. We also want to plan the zone. We want to plan the expected date for the report as part of that. Be sure that you're building into the plan. If the actual inspection is from 1 to 3, you need to give that person probably from 3 to 5 to write the report. So that whole afternoon is going to have to be taken by somebody else so they can do the entire activity. It's not just tick, 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 go back to your workstation. We also want to think about the theme, if applicable, the zone, and we can also be strategic in allocating zones based on getting people in zones they're not always familiar with. So we actually delegate our team members right in the invite. Should we give advance notice? I don't think you should. I think you should plan around your staff time. You could even just call it JHSC activity if you don't want to tell them it's an inspection, but like you as a management group, you need upper management support to say, as a frontline leader, as a supervisor, you need, anytime the Joint Health and Safety Committee says they need Tova off the floor, you have to make her available. And especially if they give you notice, you have to do that. By inviting the supervisors to the inspection, wouldn't that be an advance notice? Not if they're inspecting a different area. So yeah, pro and con. Sometimes you have to go with the announced inspection because you need to get a technical expert there. If I need to talk to the guy that operates that one piece of equipment, I may need to give advance notice. Sometimes we give advance notice due to time pressures. Now, with the advance notice side of things, staff may rush to remove hazards before your arrival, but chances are with habituation and complacency, you're going to find the stuff they don't even realize is a hazard because it's just become the background of their lives. You also may feel pressured to come up during a less active time. I want you to show up and do your inspections when stuff is happening. If you know that your prime time, your busiest time for your shipping department is 9 a.m. to noon, you're like, oh no, like I'm going to go do the inspection in the afternoon when they're quiet. No, I want you to go and do your inspection when it is at max chaos factory. When things are super, super busy, because you cannot separate the environment from the people and the tasks. You want to go when work is being done. And you want to see it when it is the ugly of the sausage factory. You don't want to see it when things are quiet. I know it sounds counterintuitive and you're like, but they don't want me there. They don't have a choice. That's when the JHSC scheduled the inspection. And it's the Joint Health and Safety Committee, not the employer, that schedules the inspection. I am a fan of surprise inspections because you're going to see real-time conditions. You're less likely to have management pulling a Homer and the Bee. I don't know if you remember The Simpsons, where the nuclear commission, was showing up and they dragged all of the least intelligent employees to the basement and gave them a bee in a jar to babysit. And then, and then Homer, the bee got out and he's like, we did bad. And then he's like popping up from the series like, the bee bit my bottom and now my bottom is big. You don't want to give surprise inspections if your management are going to be hurrying off the staff that don't know what they're doing to herd them into the lunchroom. We also want to use surprise inspections to prevent supervisors from trying to hide things. Maybe they try to shove the chemicals behind the welder and they're like, oh no, we don't want them to see what we're using. You're also much more likely to see staff doing their actual usual activities. There are sometimes things that you're like, okay, well, we don't want our inspections today, so we're not going to go and paint these parts with the isocyanate stuff that we don't actually have personal protective equipment for. We're just going to go and be sanding so that that's what they see. You want to see people doing what they're really doing, not what they want you to see. Thinking about building your dream team. You absolutely need to have a worker member of the Joint Health and Safety Committee involved. They don't have to be certified, but they do have to be a worker if you're doing a JHSC inspection. Management members going and doing inspections on their own is not cool and not okay. But you can also bring other people along. You can bring management members along. That's totally fine. You could bring people that are interested in joining the JHSC, prospective committee member ride-alongs. You could grab a student. We're heading into co-op student season. Go ahead and grab your co-op student and bring them along. It's a great learning opportunity for them. It's an opportunity for you to get a fresh set of eyes, and for them to be able to see what a JHSC is all about, to really kind of build into your safety process. But you could invite your regional manager if they're coming to your workplace, senior leaders, the supervisor of the zone. Obviously, that's going to involve an announced inspection, as discussed in the chat. Even bring your supervisor, your safety coordinator, a maintenance team member, a lot of different people that you can bring along. You could even bring a worker with solid technical expertise. If you've got, Jerry, who's been working in the workplace for 30 years and he knows this place inside and out, maybe ask Jerry to come along on one of your inspections. In the chat, I would love for you to tell me who is on your dream team. What if the worker member is the one touching the area before the inspection? Do you have any other workplace committee JHSC members that are worker members who can do this so that we can assign somebody who's not this person? Okay, so smaller workplace. Sounds like there's only myself and the employee rep and him on the committee. Okay, so you're the employer rep and then there's him. There's less than 20. So what I would do maybe is maybe try a little bit harder on the to go together and to do it as a surprise inspection. Also, I'm going to tell you if you're cleaning up, every single thing that that gets cleaned up has to be noted on the inspection. So cleaning up before the inspection is not going to be effective. Yeah, they include okay, so Tracy's including the department H&S rep. I've been on the H&S rep in other past workplaces. For me, we inspect together every single time. Now, I would maybe do like roll the die inspections where you say, you know what, we're going to be doing surprise times. And then be like, hey, it's time for the inspection, and there's no time to clean up. I will say that, like, everything that's happening that he's cleaning up, if you already know he's cleaning this stuff up, what's the root cause for those things being there? You may also want to challenge him to write down the things he cleans up. Oh, yeah, no, yeah, maybe hiding something, maybe. It is a good time. If this is the time that you're doing the inspection, congratulations, it is a good time. Supervisor management representative should accompany the JHSC member at least once a year. I think that's a great practice, Tracy. I would love to see management come at least once a year. And Marnie, feel free to hit me up for a call outside of this because I have to kind of move forward. But it sounds like we could have a good conversation about this. And I would love to help you out with that. Setting up for success. I really do believe that you need to give people specific hazard training. If you have racking, please, for the love of God, send people to the racking course. It's the CSA A344, inspecting and maintaining of steel storage racks. If you've taken it in the past, the guideline has actually changed. We now have a 2024 guideline. The course is updated. Now is the time to update your training. If you've got radiation safety, make sure that staff get some training on that. If you've got pedestrians and fork trucks, be sure that your folks get a deeper dive in that. It can be sure they know about machine guarding and lockout, even if they're in an office. If you've got a certified member that doesn't know how to do lockout or doesn't know what lockout and tagout is, that's a giant gap in your process here. For chemical safety, be sure they know about the chemicals that are in the workplace, not just the ones that they use, but also what the spills training should look like, because spills training is one of those things that if you're in an area and there's a spill, at least they're able to respond. Ergonomics, We have a fantastic half day on conducting a basic office ergonomic assessment. Could be a great way to turn some of your JHEC members into ergo champions. Also a great way to be able to spot some of those ergonomic risks. And that is not just in offices, but ergonomics applies in industrial workplaces as well. And don't forget about mental health in the workplace too. We have a couple of different ones, including mental health in the workplace, what GHSCs need to know. And then once we've got our plan together, can I send the link to the writing course? Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead and send me an email. Again, for those of you that are about to pepper me with emails, feel free to do so. I'm at tovalarson@WSPS.ca. If you want particular links, I'm happy to send them to you. That is a great one. We did inspections groups of 2, worker reps, manager reps. Welcome to join. Awesome. Sounds great, Denise. So inspection plan and maintenance review, or inspection plan, maintenance, and review. Like I said, your documents are living documents. Maintain a record of your inspection plan, regularly review to see that your tools are still current to the tasks and activities in your workplaces, and get your user feedback, take your user feedback into consideration and adjust your tools to make them as great as they can be. I like to look at least once a year at my tools. And if you have a fantastic health and safety coordinator or health and safety manager, work with your health and safety department as part of that creating of great tools. So let's talk now about actually conducting the inspection. What are we actually looking for? We're looking for both physical conditions as well as unsafe acts and unsafe behaviors. We want to consider predictable human factors. If there is something where the lazy way to do it is the unsafe way and the hard, slow way to do it is the safe way, you can well imagine that some of your staff are probably going to do it the unsafe, lazy people way. That is predictable human behavior in a nutshell. In terms of positive observations, I don't want every one of your inspections to just be like a dump of bad stuff onto a paper. Find out what's being done well also. And this is true if you're not finding any improvements in your workplace, look for the positive. Maybe you see that folks are using the safe lifting practices. Maybe you identify that all of the guarding is in good condition. Maybe you're like, wow, our floors are like, I wouldn't eat off them, but they are clean enough that maybe I could. And you're like, our housekeeping is on point. Those are great things to observe. What are we looking for in terms of unsafe conditions? We're looking for damage, fluids, leaks, defects. We're looking for guarding that doesn't work properly, things that look, for lack of a better description, sketchy. We're also looking at material factors. Those are describing words, things like toxic, heavy, bulky, awkward, too big, no handles, are all words that I've used to describe things that I've had to lift, carry, or move. It could be too hot, it could be too cold, we could have too much, we could have too little. Those are things we're looking for as well. Maybe you are at an entrance, it's November, and there's no salt box there, and you're thinking, hey, aren't we getting into that like season where things are cold and icy and we need salt to make that better? Where's the salt? We also want to look at our tasks and activities, our process flows. You want to have great conversations with your staff. Are we setting our staff ultimately up for success? I also think you're looking to gauge your internal responsibility system, and we do that by talking to your workers. And we'll talk a little bit about virtuous cycles and vicious cycles when we get to the question portion of this. And we want to consider all of those hazard categories for for safety. We're looking at anything that can cause traumatic injuries, things like material handling, pedestrian vehicle, machinery, and working at heights. There's physical agents, those invisible sources of energy waves that can harm the body. There are those chemicals that include solids, liquids, and gases. Don't forget about chemicals inside of your machinery. You also need the safety data sheets for those because things that are inside can go outside very quickly, as well as any intermediaries. So maybe you have a chemical, it comes in, you make it into something else, and then you make it into something else. That middle thing, that's an intermediary. You need the data and information on that too. And don't forget about your exhausts and your wastes. Chemicals only have 3 places they can go: into a product, they can go into a waste stream, or they can go into the environment, including into your staff's bodies. There's no way. That's it. You can change chemicals, you might react them into something else, but ultimately, They're all going somewhere. When we look at biological hazards, you're looking for things that could cause disease in humans, things like viruses and bacteria. If you spot that moldy, gross ceiling tile, don't forget about noxious plants and pests as well. And we are, of course, heading into tick season. And we had a very mild winter, so it is like a tick population boom out there right now. MSDs, I want you to be looking for sources of excessive force, task duration, repetition, and awkward or static postures. Feel free to join us for an upcoming session of an employee reported an MSD, now what, if you want to learn a lot more about how to respond and investigate to a musculoskeletal disorder injury report. And we want to consider our psychosocial hazards as well. Often we think about that in the form of violence and harassment, but we can't forget about things like workload, organizational culture, shift work, anything that's going to impact somebody's mental well-being. When we look at guarding, you're looking for some of the basics, like the auto test. Can I reach around it, under it, through it, over it? Don't do this with your own fingers. Use your imagination. If you could get around it, that's bad. It means that your guard is not adequate and almost certainly does not meet the CSA machine guarding 432 standard. Just a heads up, new standard also dropped. It's a 2023 standard, so if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, it has undergone some major revisions. If you're looking for more about machine guarding, we do have a great course on machine guarding as well. So just a heads up on that. And of course, with MSDs, I already covered these. When we think about awkward postures, duration, repetition, and force, you're looking for one or more of these factors. And the more factors you have, they compound and the risk goes up. But we have other factors as well that we want to look for, like the work organization. Like if I have to pick apples over here and then walk all the way to the other side of the warehouse for bananas, and then come back here for cantaloupe, and then go back over there for dairy, that makes no sense. Don't do this. There's individual factors. I'm 5'2". I'm a smaller stature person, and I've had a previous back injury. Thanks, 20-year-old Tova that wasn't a safety professional who made some bad choices. Those are individual factors that I can't change, but they're factors that increase my risk of an MSD. There's the work environment, the location of an electrical outlet. For MSDs, the width of a doorway. If you can't get a cart into the doorway and you have to hand bomb all of this, that's a great example of an environment factor that could increase the risk of MSDs for staff. And then we have psychosocial factors, and those are related to being rushed, to some of it's organizational decisions. I remember one warehouse where they said that if you picked over your quota, which is already a jaw-droppingly large number, they'd put your name in a hat for a TV at the end of the month. What does that do? It may incentivize your staff to work fast, but it definitely incentivizes them to work in an unsafe way. I don't recommend doing that. That's not safety culture. That's the complete opposite. Now, don't forget, and I'm not going to cover all of these, to take a look at the CSA standard. It is the only CSA standard that is not behind a paywall around the workplace factors for mental and psychological well-being. It's called the Psychological Health and Safety Standard, and it looks at everything from the physical and psychological demands of the job to work-life balance to protection of physical safety, which is usually where you should start. Don't try to self-actualize if you're still, trying to keep your people safe from a physical standpoint. But start there, and then you can move on to things like workload management, recognition and reward, and growth and development. We also, in this process, want to start thinking about our internal responsibility system. And our internal responsibility system is made up of employers, supervisors, and workers working together. And it's like a jigsaw puzzle. The employer, and I'm going to use the example of policies and procedures. Employer establishes them, supervisor communicates and enforces them. Workers have to follow them and report any problems that they have with them. That is one puzzle with three unique complementary pieces that click together, which means everybody is having to cooperate and communicate. But what happens if there are gaps in your internal responsibility system? Try to figure out why. So if the employer has great policies, but the supervisors aren't enforcing them, as a JHSC, it's not your job to get into HR issues or be like, all these supervisors need to be disciplined. Stop. Could you recommend something to set them up for success more fully? Maybe we could write, maybe they don't know their legal responsibilities. Maybe they need or about due diligence. Maybe they need a supervisory responsibilities and due diligence course. Maybe they don't have the communication skills. Yeah, absolutely, Rikshana. Maybe they lack communication skills. Maybe they need something like an effective supervisor that teaches them how to lead, how to mentor, how to guide, how to speak to people who have different learning styles, who are in a different generation than them, or are coming to Canada and they speak English or French as a second language. Maybe they need better upper management support around using the discipline process. Maybe they've tried to use discipline for safety and it hasn't been very effective because they've been overruled by management. Perhaps they don't know enough about your discipline process or they don't have a great relationship with HR. I always say that when people are not undertaking their responsibilities, it's usually not out of malice. It's often out of a lack of information or a lack of oversight or a lack of support. And that is equally true for workers who are not reporting hazards. Often they don't report hazards because you are stuck in a vicious cycle. They report a hazard, nothing happens, their manager belittles them, or they tell them to go back to work and they don't really care. And they will never report a hazard again because when they reported the first one, the response they got was negative. You're looking to create virtuous cycles. They report a hazard, their supervisor says, wow, thanks for letting me know. I'm going to get on this right away and I'm going to communicate with you as we make improvements. I'm going to communicate with you at the end of the day to tell you where I'm at. I may not have had fixed it completely, but I'm going to keep you in the loop. And at the end of the day, they say, just to let you know, I've submitted a maintenance ticket and I'll be following up with the maintenance manager on Monday to see where they're at with the maintenance ticket. They actually follow up on Monday, follow up with the worker, and they say, hey, I checked in with the maintenance manager. The maintenance manager ordered the part and it's going to be delivered on Wednesday and then it's going to be installed on Thursday. Thursday comes, the part is installed, they see improvement, and the next hazard they find, they are absolutely going to report it because they saw the system work. It's absolutely the same for incident reports. 100%. People don't report things that they don't think anything is going to change. So you need to be transparent and you need to be cooperative with the change. On inspections, we also have problems with questions. I love talking to workers, but they come in two kinds. Over participators who come running when they see the clipboard and word vomit off 85 problems. And then you have the under participators who avoid eye contact and try to blend into the surroundings. How do we deal with these? Over participators, ask them for every single one of their 85 problems they just told you, have you reported this to your manager or supervisor? It allows you to be able to gauge the trust and communication that underpins that internal responsibility system. If they did report it, what was the outcome? Is it a communication issue where, maybe the manager's working on it, but they're not communicating the progress? That's a gap. If it wasn't actioned, why not? Did the manager go back to them, and explain what was going on? You're looking for the gaps in the communication, trust, and collaboration that underpins the IRS. Over participators are great to spot that. For under participators, the best way that you can get them to open up to you is to explain your role, especially if you're a worker member. Be like, I'm a worker too. I'm here to try to help make your job better. Explain what a JHSC is if they don't know. And show them you value what they do. Every single person does something valuable in your organization. It doesn't matter if they are the CEO, the CFO, or whether they clean the floor. If that job was not important, they wouldn't be paying somebody to do it. And your cleaners are such a critical piece of your safety program that they deserve an award for that. They're safety superheroes. You need to show respect for their skill set, respect for the individual tasks and jobs. This is not just cleaners, this is every job. When someone can see that you value their expertise, their knowledge, they're a lot more likely to open up to you. Ask them to teach you something. That can start that conversation because it shows that you respect them. All right, moving on. I want you to think about some of your favorite questions to ask during inspections, and I certainly have a few of my own. Some of my favorite questions are, what task do you do that you hate doing? What's your most hated task? Everybody hates doing things that put them in pain, are gross, sticky, smelling, humiliating, or demoralizing. I also like asking people questions that are open-ended. And feel free to answer this one in the chat. If you had a blank check that you had to spend on safety, what would you buy? Why is this not done yet? That question, I maybe would, I would say, I think I would maybe rephrase that a little bit. I would be asking a little bit more about why this hazard is still happening. So tell me more about the backstory for the hazard, because then you'll be able to spot some of the contributing factors. And if you can get to the contributing factors, you're a lot more likely to be able to address it at the root cause. I love that question though. Like low-key Snarktova absolutely loves that question. What are we looking for? In terms of questions, you can theme your questions on the various 6 hazard categories. You can ask chemical questions, MSD questions. You can ask questions about, you can ask questions, and here, I think I have a slide on this. If we don't find anything, you can ask questions about, I love that. Have you recently done violence, women's, or code red training? I love that. Asking about training, asking about tasks, asking about the first aid kit or the first aid board or who your first aider is. I love these questions. Feel free to keep them coming. The question I get asked most is, what if we don't find anything? If you didn't find anything, did you consider all 6 of the hazard categories? Have you collected the staff's wish list with the blank check question? Did you learn something new from a worker? That's also a great win. If you learned how to use a piece of equipment, or they showed you like they're super excited about the new mixing station in the janitorial closet, that's awesome. Do you have positive things that you can share? Maybe it's things for a previous inspection that got fixed. That's a great thing to share. I would still obviously note these. You still have to complete the report to demonstrate that a search was made so that you're able to demonstrate that your inspections are being done. But I will tell you that I've never gone on a workplace inspection where I haven't found something. Even here at WSPS, I had a colleague who he was inspecting our office. He did 5 or 6 inspections, didn't find anything. He said, Tova, do you want to come along? Because I'm not finding anything and I want another set of eyes. If you don't find anything, feel free to get another set of eyes as well. I made the, I don't know if it was a mistake. I'm not going to call it a mistake, but it was definitely something different. I stuck my head behind the TVs on the wall and I found like a rabbit's nest of like extension cords plugged into power bars, plugged into other extension cords, plugged into power bars that were put there by a contractor. I was like, whoa, that's not right. It's a great example of some of the things that you can find if you get a second set of eyes. Ask staff to show you their work. Absolutely. I love asking questions about changes. Nadine, great idea. Change management questions are golden, especially if it's changes that are coming or changes that have been recently implemented and you're getting user experience feedback on it. Love it. I remember getting the former HNS manager to go there. There was the safety issue and looked at me and said, I was surprised you didn't find it on your inspection. I don't ever want to shame someone for the stuff they don't find. And I'm going to tell you why. Because for the JHSC worker members doing these, they're always doing their best. There's no expectation of perfection. But I do ask you to try to spot as many hazards as you can find. It's like finding all the like catch them all Pokemon. You may not actually catch them all, but you're going to do your best to try to find as many as you can, right? With the knowledge and skills that are in your toolbox. All right, so developing recommendations. Why do we include risk level? It's all about prioritization. We always want to start with our highest risk hazards first. For formal recommendations, if you find a high risk, I would really encourage you to do a formal recommendation, but we always want to start with allowing you to be able to let that employer respond to those things that are most likely to cause injury and most likely to cause severe injury or illness first. And to do that, we use our risk level. There are a bunch of different ways you can do this. Some do high, medium, low. When we do hazard assessments, we use the CSA Z1002 standard that looks at frequency, likelihood, and impact. How likely is this task? How often is the task performed? If it's performed really infrequently, it changes the probability. You use the frequency and likelihood to calculate a probability score, and then you use the impact score around severity to then use the probability score and the impact to create a risk level. And you end up with a matrix to calculate the probability score. This is all in the CSA standard, by the way. And we do have a little bit more about risk assessment in hazards and risks and introductions. So if you're like, this was super brief, feel free to join us for that. And you end up with a resulting risk score. The lower the number, the higher the risk. If it's an R1, stop what you're doing right now. This is a super, super high extreme risk, and you need to put controls in place immediately. Whereas if you get an R13, that's going to be a medium risk. I would want to deal with my R4 before I get to my R13. I like the CSA standard approach because it gives these R scores. And even within a particular category, you might get 10 risks that are high, but I might have a 4, a 7, a 5, and a 6. And I'm going to start with my 4 first, even though they were all in the high category. I may also want to look at frequency as a component to this and say, if the R4 is something we only do once every 6 months and it's not coming for another 6 months, I may want to go to with my R13 if it's the most frequent task. Even though the risk score is lower, I'm about to do it sooner. So we want to be smart about how we prioritize our recommendations. As we develop these recommendations, we also want to consider compliance. And so we're checking against things like the CSA standards, the industrial establishment regulation, the manufacturer's specs, to see that whatever recommendations we're making are going to result not only in reduced risk, but also we're looking to ensure that it is in fact going to bring us into legal compliance. I love this. I ask about processes where there are multiple teams involved with a handoff. Oh yeah, handoffs can be really sticky, where they may not hand off all of the information. You get into it and you're like, whoa, wasn't prepared for that. Those are great. I love that question also, Nadine. Now, part of our development of recommendations is also to think about the hierarchy of controls. And we always want to start at the top. And again, if you joined us for hazards and risks and introduction, you have seen this. If you joined us for certification, you've seen it. It's a basic health and safety concept. Some controls are a lot more effective than others. Elimination, substitution, engineering are a lot more effective because they don't rely on people to make good choices. Awareness, administrative, and personal protective equipment require consistent human choices. And we all know there are lots of people that make good, safe choices, and we all have that friend who totally does not. So as much as possible, we want to start at the top of the hierarchy and consider elimination first. And if we can't do that, can we substitute? Can we engineer? And move on down the hierarchy? And don't forget, you can put multiple controls in place. Having a layered controls approach, every control has pluses and minuses to it. These are constantly evolving holes of Swiss cheese, especially late at night where the holes get really big as people get tired. And the more layers you have, the more likely it is that you're going to have a multitude of varieties of types of protection, and together they're going to give you a complete or more or less complete picture. Now, here in the photo, we see that even within controls, we actually still had some hazards. If we put another piece of Swiss cheese that blocks that particular hole, we have better protection. We also want to ask, why are these hazards happening? We want to think about contributing factors. And this is where talking to workers can be really valuable. When did this start? Tell me more about, why this is being done in this way. Tell me a little bit more about, this particular piece of equipment. And they say, oh, it's been broken for 6 months. I submitted a ticket to the maintenance department, but it didn't get fixed. Well, that's not a problem with the worker. That's a problem with clearly your maintenance process. So dig into that. I also look at work performed on the off shift. Love it. Yes, 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 yes. And to do the inspection when the main staff for emergency response are not on site. Nadine, you are full of nuggets of gold. So if for those of you that aren't looking at the chat, I would highly recommend that you dig into some of what's coming in the chat as well. These are great ideas. This is why I love Safety Connection, because it's a great idea for me to pick ideas out of other people's heads too. So what are we looking for? For people factors. People factors are things that people do or don't do. But when we're thinking about developing the controls, how are we going to improve individual decision making? Remember, no one makes a decision in a vacuum. They're factoring in that the equipment is broken, or that it's covered in pinch points, or that you don't have a lift gate on a vehicle, so they're having to hand bomb stuff over to the top of a truck. We want to look at ways we can improve the equipment, ways that we can make the materials lighter, safer, smaller packaging, handles, less toxic. We're looking for opportunities to improve the environment, like installing an electrical outlet where you need it if you have that extension cord that's become permanent. We're looking to change our processes. Maybe you identify that the reason that cord is there is that your company chose the cheapest painters who didn't put the blinds back up, and now it's too hot, and now your staff put a fan in, and they stuck an extension cord because that's what they needed so that they weren't literally melting in the accounting department. That's an indication that we need to change the process for procurement and be sure that when we're evaluating a bid, we're thinking from the beginning to end of an actual job. Putting the blinds back up should be part of the job. If the cheap painters say they won't do that, and you think, oh, our maintenance department is going to do it. Well, are they really in a timely manner? Maybe not. I also love 5 whys because it's even something as simple as a burnout light bulb can be an indication of deeper things. Why was it not reported? It was, but they didn't get actioned. But why not? Because maintenance ran out of light bulbs. Actually, they submitted the purchasing request and the purchasing clerk didn't process it because they're off sick. Well, why can't we just go to Home Depot and just petty cash this? Look, there's an easy button to this. I know that's Staples, but we'll run with it. Turns out that there's no one to process the petty cash because the purchasing clerk does that too. We aren't giving out copies of PowerPoint, but if you have to jump off, we will be doing questions at the end. Again, feel free to hit me up. Feel free to scroll back in the chat for my email. I'm always happy to chat with you if you have further questions. Why do we have no backup person for our petty cash? Because we never thought the petty cash person would be off for this long period. They said they had a week of vacation, and lo and behold, they're not on vacation, they're sick. It's a planning fail. Recently learned about the 3-legged 5 why. It includes 3 detection of the issue and system factors. I love that, Nadine. Feel free to hit me up. I would also love to see your 3-legged system. Let me know as we tail off our session today if you are using contributing factors. As you write your report, the report and the checklist are not the same thing. Use the checklist to find your hazards. Be sure you have lots of space for additional hazards that are not on the checklist. And then the report has things like the photos, the risk rating, the identified actions that you're asking for, and often includes sections of the Act or regulations you believe are being contravened. I always like to support my recommendations and my report with sections of the Act. And for each action item, I want you to look for the root causes plural. I always put an S, there is always more than one. And then we delegate accountability. Oftentimes, when we have things that are not getting done, it's because we said someone has to do something and someone doesn't exist. Be sure that you're putting an actual name or a department. It's the maintenance department, it's going to be the safety manager, it's going to be the department manager, and then put some time frame for when this needs to be done and then check up on it. You also may have some issues where you need a short, medium, or long-term. Yes, we do have a template. Winter, I can send it to you. We do have have short, medium, and long-term solutions. You might have an immediate solution, but it's not going to be your long-term solution. Be sure that you're including all of the various steps along the way. Sometimes you want to choose a formal recommendation for more complex issues, big budget items, things that like your repeat items. Formal recommendation from the JHSC. Other things you will need to think about more of the informal route would be quick fixes, easy wins, things that only affect one work group or area, and things that are already reflected in your organization's risk or hazard register. But yeah, those repeat items, start sending formal recommendations that trigger your employer for a legal 21-day response. That's one of my biggest recommendations, and I can tell you how to write a great recommendation. Then we follow up. It sounds like a lot of you are struggling with the follow-up part of this. Be sure that you have a list of who you send your report to. That could be the supervisor for the area, maintenance, co-chairs, the health and safety department, and then divide and conquer. If one person is responsible for way too many things, they're probably not going to get all of them done, and establish responsibility by name so that you're not just someone will do it. We also want to ensure that action items are completed. And if you're not getting action, use your formal recommendation to trigger that 21-day legal clock. And if they don't respond in 21 days, then you submit another recommendation that says that you recommend that your employer respond to recommendations within the legally mandated 21-day time frame. Then what is working? How well are our controls actually reducing risk? We want to get user feedback on our changes. Users know their work the best. If they tell you this sucks, then please take that into consideration. Have we created new hazards or new problems with unintended consequences? Has the risk level actually gone down? If you had a high risk before and you have a high risk at the end, you didn't actually reduce the risk. You maybe put some controls in place, but they weren't doing what you were hoping. And then last, records management. I recommend that there's no mandated time frame to keep your inspection documentation. I recommend keeping it for 5 years. At an absolute bare minimum, please keep it for 2 years, because the limitation for prosecution in Ontario is now 2 years from the date of the last offense or when the ministry found out about the offense. So that's why I say I recommend keeping it for 5 years, and please make these open source documents. Post them on your health and safety boards, put them in a repository that everybody has access to on a shared drive or on your intranet to build a culture of transparency. If you are not being transparent, you're losing opportunities to build trust. All right, it's 12:02, and you're like, there's no way they're getting through all of this. Tell me what your favorite takeaways were. Transparency is a big issue, and we can have a whole conversation about that. What was your favorite takeaway from today's session? It is 12:02. I just see some questions popping up in the chat. I am here for you to pepper me with questions until the end of time. But if you do have to hop off, thank you so much for joining us for Safety Connection. I hope you have a fantastic and safe day. Don't hesitate to reach out to me if you're looking for more information or you'd like to have a chat about your inspection strategy. I'm always here to offer support, and calls and chats are always free. You get wonderful services from your fabulous Health and Safety Association. Yours is WSPS. And it is one of the perks of, when you pay into your WSIB premiums, you get these fabulous services to help you be safer and bring more people home safe at the end of the day. You are so welcome. I see, Simon, you've got a question about AEDs and EpiPens. How about management not willing to follow up and following up or on expired EpiPens and AED? My follow-up question is, in terms of best practices, I would maybe create the formal recommendation. One thing that might surprise you is that, and schools may be a little bit different on the EpiPen front, but AEDs are not actually a legal requirement in a workplace. They're certainly a great thing to have. If you are going to have equipment, I would support that recommendation with section 25 I believe it's 25 to B around maintenance. So 25.2 is 25.1. So go to section 25, subsection 1 of the OHSA And you'll find a specific clause that talks about maintaining equipment in good working condition. If they have it, they need to maintain it, but there isn't a legal requirement to have an AED. And so the organization may make a decision to remove the AED instead of replacing the batteries or pads, which are, in truth, horrendously expensive. And regarding the EpiPens, if you're working in an education setting, obviously you have some laws that you need to follow around EpiPens that are separate from the safety conversation for your staff. Some of the great takeaways, and I'm seeing stuff drop into the chat, breaking it down into zones, absolutely. That we need to look at the outside for inspections, even though our work is inside. Yes, absolutely. You should and you do. Utilizing recommendations to get serious and unresolved hazards addressed. I don't think any GHSC should hesitate to write a formal written business case to their employer. It is one of the best ways to be able to get safety the attention it deserves. Planning for inspection, so important. It is. Strongly pursuing follow-up from supervisors and management for reported hazards and concerns. And if you're not getting the responses you want, you could write a formal recommendation about the lack of response that you're getting from supervisors and managers. You can absolutely write a recommendation about that to try to help you along the way. You are so welcome, Rhiannon. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I hope you have a great day. Again, I'm still here for questions. Feel free to drop them into the chat. I am going to be here until folks drop off. So if you've got questions, feel free to ask. And like I said, my email is tova.larson@wsps.ca. Feel free to reach out to me if you're looking for more information about inspections, some of the tools that I've mentioned, or if you're looking for a one-on-one chat to discuss issues or concerns with your inspection strategy.